Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon.
Hey, Dr. Yeager, I was wondering if you got my email about me being like traveling during this.
Yeah, I did. You're
Okay.
fine.
Okay, thank you.
It was just another minute or two, guys. Doesn't look like too many people have joined just yet. All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started. We have a lot to do today. You know, 3 weeks into the class, and this is only the second time we've met. Good Lord. But hopefully you guys found last week the recording sufficient. How did you guys do on your quiz for it? I haven't taken a look yet. Did you guys do good on your quiz from last week's? Yeah. Yeah, so I put up another one yesterday on the Socrates material to make sure I recorded a class last semester with on the Socrates material, so you can take a look at that. I'll mention some stuff about that material today as well. Um, but yeah, it's like a 50-minute long class. Then you can take a quiz on it after. And after this, we should be caught up on everything. I know that it's the situation that we had was not ideal. Like I'm great with one snow day or two, but 2 weeks of snow days, good Lord, this has been an interesting winter. I remember my senior year of college, we had a winter about like this too. It was like 2 to 3 weeks we didn't meet. But luckily, we're still staying on pace. And next Monday, we will be starting Aristotle. Okay, so if, if you don't have your copy of Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics yet, probably will be needing it starting on Monday. We're going to be looking at that pretty extensively over the next 2+ weeks. We're going to be doing a close reading of that book. So, just a word of warning about the book. It's a Philosophers tend not to be the best writers. Okay, so unlike taking a class like World Lit, where you're reading Homer and Virgil and all these eloquent poets, these philosophers aren't the most eloquent of writers. Okay, but they're writing about really important stuff. So I would suggest that you give yourself plenty of time to read it. And that's not a reading that you really want to rush. Um, give yourself time to read it. Like I would usually, I know it's not ideal, but what I usually tend to do when I read difficult stuff like that is I'll give it a read over once. Then, then the next day or something, I'll go back and read it more carefully. That usually helps with my comprehension whenever I'm reading something that difficult. So, Aristotle's not the most difficult of philosophers, but probably more than what you're used to. So, yeah, just word to the wise, give yourself plenty of time to read it. The copy that I had you guys get through um, the class, it has some really good notes and stuff in it, like for terms that might not be familiar to you. It'll give you kind of like a nice vocabulary for kind of understanding some of the stuff that he's talking about. But the whole enterprise of his book Nicomachean Ethics is, of course, how you live the good life. And as you guys will find out, he's a lot of that is about a lot of his book is about balance, like trying to always find the mean between two extremes. So like Aristotle kind of takes a mathematical approach to like how can we live a good life. I think he starts. I'm going to be rereading it with you all, but I think he starts off by talking about bravery. I think that's what he starts. Courage. Courage is like the middle point between recklessness and cowardice. So we'll be going into all that starting on Monday. He goes into like he goes into like what he talks about the cardinal virtues. We'll go into all that over the next couple of weeks. So make sure that you're caught up on your. We're going to be reading 2 books of it a day. Whenever we talk about ancient Greek lit, they'll call things books. Books is just a fancy word for chapter. But really, we're going to be reading 2 different chapters of the thing every class period until we're done with it. There's 10 chapters in it. I might skip over some of the middle chapters. I think 5, 5 and 6, I think, are the most teachable of chapters. So I might skip over a couple of the chapters, but we'll be reading most of it. So just a couple of things that I wanted to go over real quickly as well before we start talking about Plato today. One of the trying to streamline 2 different classes into one here. But I have posted for you guys a handout going back to like the McIntyre chapter on chapter 2. His chapter about ancient Greeks concepts of ethics before Aristotle and Plato, I think is a really important thing to talk about. I kind of wanted to get your guys' take on this as well. Before these concepts of things like good and evil and how do you live a good life, how do you function well within your society, these things go back even before writing itself was a thing. Like if you go back to talking about something like Homer's The Iliad or the Odyssey, that was like an oral poem. Like that was not a poem that was written down until centuries later. Before that, it was like recited around campfires and stuff, and people would tell these stories to each other. But from Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, and this might be something that I pick on a couple of you guys on. I know Emily and Mandy and Caitlin are in here, and they've taken that class with me. We can gather how the Greeks felt about certain different things. So the question is, how do you live a good life? And a lot of the way that they thought about it came down to this term called agathos. Agathos. And the translation for that, good, noble. McIntyre's point on that, you are living a good life depending on how you successfully perform a social role, factual and evaluated at once. So how well are a lot of the way that they saw this was how good are you at your occupation? Like if you do a really darn good job of it, that's living a good life. So like the Iliad, for instance, is about 2 main characters named Hector and Achilles. And if you study that text carefully, Hector at first seems like he's the more, even though he's on the side of the Trojans are who we should be rooting against. Hector usually seems like the more likable character. Achilles is the main character for the Greeks. Achilles is super selfish, right? Like the book starts off with they're arguing about what should there be their spoils of war, and the king takes away Achilles' concubine, and Achilles decides to pout and withdraw from the war until he gets his loot back. And you think to yourself, okay, what's heroic about this guy, right? He seems kind of selfish and self-centered. But the Greeks would have saw Achilles as living the best life because he was very successful at his social role of being a good soldier. Nobody was a greater warrior than Achilles. There's lots of different concepts on this list. I could go into you also see hubris with Achilles, his overreaching pride. I could go into a whole spiel about this, but this is the most important concept that I wanted to talk about, just to go over that lesson. I would have spent a whole class on it, but I'm having to streamline. How well are you at living a good life depends on how good you are at your job, pretty much. What do you guys think about this idea? Because if you think about it, like we know, let's talk about how what a good job is. How do you do a good job in certain occupations? So, like, let's take for instance a teacher. What maybe one of you guys unmute and tell me like what makes a good teacher versus what makes a bad teacher. Okay, well, Mandy just typed in the chat work ethic and consistency. What do you mean by consistency, Mandy? Just always being there for you, maybe consistent in returning assignments. Um, if that's the mark of a good teacher, I probably fail because I can be late giving the papers back sometimes. I'll give you a minute to type. What about some of the rest of y'all? Um, what makes a good teacher versus a bad teacher? We can do this for several different ones. We can talk about nurses as well. But what makes a good one versus a bad one?
You talking nurses or teachers?
So let's do teachers first, then we'll do nurses.
Okay. Always being there to help your student out if they have a question.
Okay. So yeah, always be willing to talk and communicate. Good communication is key to being a good teacher. Um, Mandy says letting students know what is required and holding to set principles equip their students to be good employees. Um, yeah, I would say instead of employees, I would say good citizens there, Mandy. But that's the English professor really instead of the business professor, right? I work with the little ones, and it's always important to be patient. Hannah says, "Yeah." And you want to chime in there, Hannah? Tell us what your experiences are with how you need patience as a virtue on a daily basis.
I think really you just have to remember that they want somebody to listen to them, you know?
Okay. What ages do you work with?
Mainly, well, I'm a substitute teacher, so I can go all over the county, but I try to stick with like elementary school, so first, second, third, sometimes kindergarten.
Yeah, I think you got a good point. They want to be heard and recognized and things like that. Yeah, I think I told you guys my wife's is a kindergarten teacher. I don't think I would last a day in doing her job. But yeah, being heard and respected. So, well, we're putting positive definitions on what would make a good teacher. I guess a simple way of saying what a bad teacher would be negating that, right? So we would say maybe not a good communicator, not willing to listen, not willing to sort of see the humanity in their students. Um, and maybe, according to Mandy's definition, maybe not holding to set principles, maybe being lazy. You guys all know the death by PowerPoint teachers, right? You've probably all had those at some point. Um, they've been using the same PowerPoint slides for 30 years. Like they don't know how to teach other than PowerPoint. So we've all had one of those at some point or other. I saw Jordan give a little grin there. Jordan has had such a teacher at some point. So, so good. What about, well, let's, instead of the nurses, let's use a medical doctor. What makes a good medical doctor versus a bad one? Autumn, was you going to say something? I think you might have been muted.
I think a good one is one that will actually listen to you and not just be like, oh, okay, here's a prescription. And it's not even like something that would actually help. Or they just brush it off.
Good. Yeah, especially like if you're maybe going to like a psychiatrist or something, right? Like having one actually listen instead of just brush you aside. Mandy said the same thing, listening. Um, so we're coming up with similar definitions as a good teacher here. What else?
A doctor that respects the patient's privacy and doesn't like spread it all over and talk about it with other people.
Okay, so yeah, that's almost given a bare minimum criteria there, Emily, because if they don't do that, then they can get their medical license stripped away. So that's, but yeah, if you're not holding certain standards of privacy, then you can't even practice the profession. What else?
For me, like this is kind of generalized, but if you don't know something or don't understand something, to me, it's a plus for you to go ask somebody instead of just winging it, especially because I work in dermatology. Well, yeah, I work in dermatology. So that kind of stuff, you can't really, a lot of that stuff, you can't just play around with.
Yeah, that's a good point. So even showing humility, right? Like, don't think you know it all. Don't think you can handle every need for every patient. Right? Sometimes you have to even refer a patient to somebody who's more knowledgeable on a certain subject. So a lot of doctors don't want to do that. Good. I like that on just knowledge in general, right? If you don't want your doctor to be a bumbling buffoon who barely passed it, would you rather have a doctor who got a C average through medical school, or would you rather have a doctor who had an A average through medical school? I think you all have the probably would say the A, right? Um, but even with that knowledge, it isn't always. You need those other characteristics as well. So how many of you guys have ever been to like a specialist? Like you guys are all talking, some of you guys have already said it. Like you want to be heard, you want to be listened to, you want to be seen. How many of you guys have been to specialists? You might have seen the doctor for all of 30 seconds. The rest of the time you were talking to like a nurse practitioner or something. Um, I'm sure most of you have been in that boat. Um, I could go in a whole rant about that because that's actually what I did my doctorate on, was the history of medical reform in the United States and how that shows up in the literature. But for over a century now, Americans have distrusted the medical profession because they don't think the medical profession cares about them. This is Americans have tended to always kind of go towards alternative medicine, like homeopathy, things like that. And part of this distrust stems from that. Like, but the medical objection to that is doctors can't be too close to their patients. You have to kind of treat your patients like lab rats in some ways, to kind of fully see the whole picture objectively instead of getting too emotionally invested. But you don't want a doctor who's going to treat you like a lab rat, right? You want to have one that's going to treat you like a human being. So this is exactly what the ancient Greeks had figured out, right? That how well you live a good life depends on how well you are at your prescribed social role. For the Greeks, they didn't have a lot of choice in what they did for their social role. So like it was rare that somebody like went from being very poor to being very prosperous. Most of the time in the Greek world, you were born into it. There wasn't a lot of like social stratification. So a lot of how well you were at a certain role also depended on how much you accepted the role that you were born into. They were more free and open about that than some other cultures. Like if you talk about ancient India, you were forbidden to go up in rank. China as well sort of frowns on it. We'll talk about that as the semester goes on. But lots of times people were born into slavery, for instance, in the ancient world. Well, slavery in the ancient world didn't hinge on race like it did in America much later. It mostly just hindered on luck. Like if your country lost a war to the Greeks or something, right, they would enslave people. If you happen to be born into that situation, good luck. So that's very much a streamlined version of that lecture. And there are a couple of questions on the quiz about what I just talked about on the Socrates quiz. Make sure that I just wanted to go over that more carefully with you. And the Socrates material, I'll just mention it real briefly here. Socrates was probably the first influential Western philosopher, especially not the first. I talked about in that other lecture some of the pre-Socratic ones, like Heraclitus, you can't jump into the same river twice. All those guys before Socrates, they didn't have anything to go on. They didn't have any body of knowledge to go on. So they, even though a lot of their stuff we would kind of laugh at today, they got the wheels turning, so to speak. Socrates, when he came about, Socrates actually didn't write anything down. What we have from Socrates comes from Plato, his understudy. So whenever you talk about Socrates, you always have to kind of think about what was the real Socrates like, because apparently Plato and Socrates had a lot of beef with each other. So we always kind of have to think, okay, how is Plato writing Socrates here? Is he writing him tongue in cheek? Was he being accurate? That one article that I gave you called "The Figure of Socrates" actually compares Socrates to Christ, not because Socrates was divine or anything like that. That's not where the comparison was. But the comparison was he was a person who influenced a lot of people. He started a movement, but he was also put to death for an unjust reason. So, you know, Socrates in the Apology, his whole shtick was just teaching people that they know nothing. He wanted people to radically question everything about their society. And he happened to be doing this at a time when the ancient Athens reverted from democracy over to tyranny. For a short period of time, after the great leader Pericles was in Greece, they temporarily reverted over to a tyrannical form of government. And Creon was overseeing Greece, or not Greece as a whole, overseeing Athens, the city-state. And he saw Socrates as being a danger to that. Like, authoritarian governments don't want you questioning that how they work and how they operate. So they pretty much just had a witch hunt on Socrates and accused him of corrupting the youth. It's kind of similar to what professors get accused of today by certain politicians, right? We're trying to turn you into liberals, they say. Well, if I'm gonna, not really. Even if I was trying to do that, who would listen to me, for one? But that's very much a sweeping generalization of all professors, for one. That was kind of the same thing that they saw then. So they really started a witch hunt on this poor guy and accused him of corrupting the youth. And you guys didn't get this in the Apology, but they actually forced him to kill himself. Like, he killed himself, but the state made him do it. So he took hemlock poison when he died, and hemlock poison basically paralyzes you limb from limb as it reaches your blood, as it goes through your bloodstream until it stops your heart. So if you read Plato's Phaedo, you have the moment by moment account of like what they were talking about all the way up until he died. It's a really grim reading, but they talk about lots of stuff in there. Like, does the soul exist? What's the afterlife going to be? All this stuff. But the Apology, I gave you guys that reading because it's all about this fundamental question of how do you live the good life? For Socrates, he says that the unexamined life is not worth living. That's his big line in it. The unexamined life is not worth living. So he can't imagine living a life where you don't talk about these big questions. Like, imagine just going through life. Maybe some people are content with this, but he can't imagine going through life not talking about these types of subjects, not trying to make sense of them, just trying to go through life with blinders on. He can't imagine a life where you don't question everything, right? And then come to answers about it. The philosophical life, right? Asking questions, the inquisitive life, that almost like the academic life. You can't imagine living without doing that. So imagine just accepting everything you've ever heard from your parents, something like that, never questioning it. Maybe some people were okay with that, but Socrates could not imagine living such a life. Whenever they told him, no, dude, shut up, stop teaching this crap, you're corrupting the youth, he refused to do it. He refused to do it on principle. And he could have probably avoided having to die for it if he would have just shut his mouth. He would have complied. Right? That's the big term going around in our public discourse right now. Right? Comply with what the government tells you to do. He could have done that, but he didn't, and they put him to death for it. This is an idea that we will be revisiting as the semester progresses. Aristotle is going to talk about this in his Ethics too. But we'll talk more about it when we get to this idea in his Ethics. But can you imagine living a life where you don't ask these big questions? This is we're going to be asking a lot of these big questions as the term goes on. So maybe this will be something I'll even ask you on the last day. Hey, can you imagine not doing this in some capacity or other? There's lots of things that we have to ask that about ourselves about. Like faith is one. Like, do you just accept your parents' faith, or do you kind of explore these questions for yourself? Philosophy is another. And so we'll keep talking about that as we go. But that's where he goes towards. His big thing is he knows nothing. He says, what makes me the wisest guy in Greece? It's admitting that I know nothing. That's what makes me the wisest guy in all of Greece. I don't even feign to act like I know everything, because I don't. If you admit your ignorance, sooner you can learn. So again, I would have talked about Socrates for a whole class, but I'm having to streamline. That's kind of the gist of the Apology. And today, and already 40 minutes into class, good God. So now I'm going to give you the streamlined version of Plato's philosophy. Okay? Plato is the giant in Western philosophy. He's really what started it. They say that all of Western philosophy owes a debt to Plato. I have a book here. Let me see if I actually have it here on my shelf. I'll show it to you. I actually have this giant book here called Christianity, the First 3,000 Years. Okay, it's over 1,000 pages long. Well, you think to yourself, well, isn't Christianity just a little over 2,000 years old? That's a weird title for the book, through the first 3,000 years. Well, there's a couple of hundred pages in the book that talk about Plato and Aristotle, because both of these guys' philosophies contributed to developing even things like Christian theology later. I think no, Christ himself did that. Yes, he did, but later the church fathers like St. Paul, St. Peter, all of these different people built a lot of Plato's and Aristotle's philosophy into developing Christian theology. So yeah, great book if you like religious studies stuff. Christianity, the first 3,000 years. So whenever we talk about these philosophers, one of the reasons why in that lecture last week, I went over all these different ways of doing philosophy. So remember some of those terms: epistemology, it's the study of knowledge. How do we know things? Aesthetics is the study of beauty. Ethics is the study of the good life. But then you also have things like political philosophy. Political philosophy is kind of an extension out of ethics. How can government help lead you to a good life? Metaphysics is the study of being. So that's the deepest level of philosophical reflection that you can do. Like, does God exist? And questions like that. What a good philosopher does is try to develop a system that answers all of these questions. And Plato was really the first philosopher to do this, to come up with a system that answers all these questions. So bear with me as I sort of try to explain it. Okay. Next time, I actually need to come up with some slides about this. Next time I'll show you some slides as a review. But Plato's system starts with this idea. Well, I'll actually type the name of his book in the chat here. His most famous book is called The Republic. And you think that sounds like a book of political philosophy. But no, it's a book that he develops his whole system of thought in this book called The Republic. And he has this something in there called the allegory of the cave. Allegory of the cave. This is where his whole system develops. So he comes up with this thought experiment. Okay, imagine that you have been in this dark cave all of your life. This dark cave. Inside the dark cave, there is some light that comes from a dim fire inside the cave. So kind of imagine like there's a couch or something in the cave, right? So you're sitting there, you never move from the couch. The only light that you see comes from the dimly lit fire behind you. But what do you see on the wall? You see shadows on the wall that come from the dim light. Okay, so that is all you know. All you see is that dim light that comes from the shadow, from the fire behind you. Maybe somebody's like making like little puppets or something on the wall, right? So you think to yourself, well, that's all I know is those little like sock puppets or something that you're doing. But one day, that thing keeping you on the couch sort of unchains. Whoever it is gets up and finds their way outside. Well, they spent their whole life being used to that dim light. When you go outside for the first time, you see the sun. It's almost overwhelming as your eyes try to get used to something like that. All you're used to is that dim light. Kind of feels like me over the last 2 weeks. I barely left my house. Go outside and I'm like, ugh, right? Go outside, the light of the sun overwhelms you. But as your eyes adjust to the sun, you start to see the whole world in a different light. You start to realize that world of shadows that you lived in the cave was not what things really were. That's not what things really were. So you go back inside the cave. You try to tell your buddies in there, hey, you should probably come outside. Like, That's a little sock puppet on the wall. That wasn't real. What's real is outside. Well, what happens when you do that? The people inside the cave will say, "Nah, I'm good, man. I don't want to. I don't want to go out there. This is what I know. I'm comfortable here. Leave me alone. You do you, and I'll do me." This is the allegory of the cave. But the question is, what's this supposed to mean? What Plato came up with here is called the theory of the forms. The theory of the forms. This is a theory that he uses to explain epistemology, knowledge. How do we know things? So inside the cave, we developed an epistemology developed around the shadows that was on the wall. But when we went outside, we saw the real reality of things in the form. And that real reality, the sun, it's this idea called the forms. So Plato's explanation of the world then stemmed from here on this earth, it's like we're in the cave. Like our senses can only lead us to certain places. Like think about it. Think about how unreliable your senses are. Your sense of sight can get distorted. Your sense of smell can lead you in the bad direction. Your hearing can lead you, can deceive you. Just using our sense knowledge alone, that's not enough. Look at how our sight got us in trouble in the cave. Here on earth, we live in an imperfect world, a world that is dimly lit. There's a separate world, Plato says, the world of the forms, where all of these different ideas take place. So like, shame we weren't all in a classroom where I could dramatically demonstrate this. But take like a chair. Let's see, I think my Cracker Barrel rocking chair is behind me in my office here. That's what I do my reading in. That's what I do my reading in. I'm like an old man. I can still demonstrate this. Let's see. Turn my dimmer off here. Yeah, here is my. So you see my fan. Here is my Cracker Barrel rocking chair. Right? See if you see it here. In Plato's world of forms, there is a perfect chair. There's a perfect idea. The forms are ideas. So there's a perfect idea of chair. Maybe this is my perfect idea of chair here on earth. I don't know. That's what I do my reading in. But that somewhere in a different reality, there's a perfect idea of chair. And here on this earth, we can only come to an imperfect understanding of these concepts. So this Cracker Barrel rocking chair is just an imperfect reflection, a dim reflection of what the perfect chair is in another reality. You can kind of take this. You can kind of take this concept to different places, thinking about all kinds of different concepts. A chair is a chair. We can think about much deeper things when we think about it at this level. Like, what's a perfect government? What's the perfect reality of that? What is the perfect idea of good versus the perfect idea of evil. If you kind of accept Plato's philosophy here, it assumes that there is an objective truth out there. The objective truth is the forms, right? So, especially when we talk about things like ethics, the good life, there is an objective truth, and truth isn't subjective; it's objective. But the problem is, as long as we're on this earth, we will fully never know what that truth is. Plato this kind of brings up a question in his thought about our bodies and how do our bodies interact with our souls. Plato does assume that a soul exists. Okay, like the ancient Greeks did believe mostly in everybody had a soul, and the Greeks, most of the Greeks did believe as well in the idea of reincarnation, that you would be reincarnated into a different body in a different life. Not all, but most. So our bodies, Plato argues, is what limits us to understanding the forms. I talked about how our senses can get us into trouble. Our bodies keep us from understanding the forms in their entirety. Only when we're dead, Plato says, once our soul kind of gets away from the limits that our body puts on us, will we fully be able to comprehend the forms. It sounds kind of pessimistic, right? Life on Earth, what will we ever know? We can't ever get to this knowledge of the forms. It sounds kind of pessimistic when I put it this way. He uses this idea to explain, like, how do we learn things. So I don't know if you guys I'll ask you guys, have any of you guys in the class ever had this like moment of like deja vu, where you kind of think to yourself, okay, I knew this, but I really can't place where I learned it. I knew it. I see you nodding, Autumn. Can you think of a specific thing like that comes to mind?
Nothing here recently. It's been stressed out. I can't remember anything lately. But for some reason, in 8th, 7th, 6th grade, it's like forever ago, I don't know why it sticks out to me, but this day we were learning about chemical reactions. And I was like, I know this. And everybody's like, how do you know it? And I'm like, I don't know.
Right. Yep. And maybe you heard it on a video or a TV show or a book you read, right? But you can't trace the source. Right? So I think we've all had. I see Brianna's comment. She says she has. Most of us have had those types of moments at some time or other. I don't think I could mention a specific one that comes to mind, but we all have at some point. Plato actually said that that's his explanation for that is that's us remembering something that we once knew in our past life. So in your past life, Autumn, you learned about chemical reactions somewhere, right? So when you learned that, it wasn't like you were learning new knowledge. It was your soul recollecting the knowledge that it had lost upon leaving the body. So once the soul re-enters into a different body, it's kind of pessimistic, his thought, because you die, then you can understand the forms. When you're reborn again, your soul loses that knowledge that it had about the forms. So it's this constant like circle where you're learning and remembering things that you once knew in your past life. So now you know, if you next time you think to yourself, okay, I know that I can't place it where, just know it was your past life, right? You accept Plato's fault.
So, do you think that's why some things come easier to some people than to others?
You could definitely apply Plato's thought to that. Maybe some people have had more past lives than others, right? Like maybe they have a wide body of knowledge that they can draw back on from their previous lives. I think he probably applied his thought to explain that. Um, of course, cognitive psychology would probably have a different explanation for that, right? Um, yeah, I know. Yeah, there's a couple of you guys in here who are doing psych major stuff. And the science of cognitive psychology would have a different explanation, but this theory of the forms would cover it too. So, yeah, this is the baseline. This is where it all starts in Western philosophy. This idea of the forms. I showed you my book here in Christianity, the first 3,000 years. You can kind of see how this idea would have influenced Christianity, right? God is the perfect form, right? And everything we're doing on earth, it's our attempt to try to find the divine. You can kind of see how the Platonic thought kind of finds its way into even things like Christianity. So this is his epistemology. The question is now, what's this got to do with ethics? Plato, and what this has to do with his ethics comes down to how Plato viewed the soul. Okay, so we know the soul is reborn several times, but the way that Plato saw the soul, and Aristotle picks up on this vocabulary too. Most of the first 1,500 years or so of Western philosophy builds on this thought. So this is kind of a nice foundation. But Plato had three ideas. The soul has three parts, according to Plato. Okay. First part is called the vegetative part of the soul, the vegetative. This is the part of the soul that keeps us alive, right? It keeps our bodily functions going. So the word soul actually goes back to the ancient Greek word anima. Anima, like a cognate for that would be like animate, a verb animate. The vegetative part of the soul animates our bodies. It keeps our heart beating, keeps our lungs breathing. This is the spirit of life that keeps our body going. And it doesn't matter what type of life it is, all life on earth has a vegetative soul. It doesn't matter if it's a plant, it's a human being, it's a dog. even if it's something like bacteria, it ain't something that minute of a level. Everything has a vegetative aspect to the soul. The second part is called the sensitive soul, or another word for that might be the animalistic soul within us. So plants do not have, or bacteria do not have an animalistic soul, but animals, human beings are animals, right? We're what was called rational animals. But all animals have souls, have this animalistic part of their soul. So this is the desire that we eat. We want to eat. We all look for drink. We all look to reproduce. Maybe not everybody, right? But it's part of the desire of animals to reproduce, to keep their line going, so to speak. So reproduction is an aspect of the animalistic soul. So this is something that human beings have in common with animals. Within the animal, most animals do not have the capacity to reason or things like that. Like, this is an interesting question in philosophy. Like, how much do animals actually know? Think about your cat, right? Like, how much? I should bring mine in here to show you. But what's your cat know, right? What's your dog know? How does your cat or dog make decisions cognitively? Both Plato and Aristotle had answers for that. I don't want to go too deep into that. But they can't quite reach the same level human beings do. And this is because only human beings, maybe if you believe in the divine, you could say angels had this capacity as well. Human beings in particular have an intellectual function to their soul. So this is what allows us to reason. It's what allows us to know and gather knowledge, things like that. We are unique within the world of creation because we have this part of their soul that no other animal has. Again, if you want to extend that idea to talking about something like the divine, angels, St. Thomas would later say, angels are just pure intellect. They don't have a sensitive or vegetative aspect to their soul. They're just pure intellect. Human beings have all three. Okay, so again, what's this got to do with ethics? Plato really distrusted following the animalistic aspects of their soul. Like, he saw human beings as being superior to other animals. And so whenever you think of things that kind of put us on the same level as animals, so think about something like I don't know, eating too much, gluttony. My cat is a glutton. It can't. If I put all the food down, it would eat it all at once. Like, my cat has no portion control. Okay, so Plato would see things like gluttony as being putting us on the level of animals, but have no control. What about maybe somebody who's like an alcoholic? Somebody who doesn't have temperance. Temperance is the word that philosophers often use for that. That puts us again on the level of animals who don't have any self-control. A lot of philosophers don't think that doing things like drinking alcohol is a bad thing, but if you can't do it within moderation and reason, then it does become a bad thing. Like even things like sex, right? Like if you're the type of people who can't satiate themselves, maybe like the serial cheaters and all that type of stuff. Like that puts us on the same level of animals as well. So he builds his whole system of thought, especially when it comes to ethics, on suggesting we should not ignore our animal impulses, but we shouldn't prioritize them. The key to the good life is to mostly avoid these animal impulses. Maybe do them in moderation. We have to. We have an animal part of our soul. But do them in moderation and pay more attention to the intellectual part of our soul. So the trying to understand the forms, Plato says, is the key to living a good and happy life. It's not getting drunk every day. It's not having copious amounts of sex. It's not eating your fill every day. Paying attention to those bodily pleasures isn't what is going to make you happy. It's going to be paying attention to the intellectual stuff. It's going to be what really makes you happy. So that was there's Plato's ethics in a nutshell. Not deny the body, but don't prioritize the body. Prioritize the intellect. Plato's idea is hardly unique. We're going to be talking about a lot of different things throughout the class. Buddhism, for instance. Buddhism, the religion of Buddhism, pretty much says the same thing in a different way. But deny the body, stimulate the mind. That's the key right there. Aristotle, as we'll find out next time, builds on this. When it comes to his ethics, Aristotle and Plato weren't too far off. They're far off on a lot of other things, but not on this. Just real quick, I know we're running out of time. I will mention Plato in our next class because I haven't talked about his political philosophy yet. I don't have time to do that today. But just real quick, what do you guys think of this idea? Think that Plato's onto something here? Like deny, like if we just pay attention to bodily pleasures, we're going to, that's not going to lead us anywhere good. It should be paying attention to the intellectual stuff. Anybody have a thought on that? Looked like you had something on the tip of your tongue there, Mandy. It looked like you were itching at the bit to talk there. Can't find out how to unmute yourself.
Yeah, actually, I was just looking at your notes and stuff. I just got out of this appointment. I was looking at your notes and stuff through the chat and taking pictures.
You think that that's true, Mandy? That paying too much attention to the body will get us in trouble?
I think I think you need to pay more attention to your mind and motives than anything.
Right. What do some of the rest of you guys think? Some of you guys even disagree with Plato. Like, hey, what's really the good life? Getting drunk on Friday night. Yeah, I saw Hannah give a little grin there. Maybe that's what she thinks. I don't know. The answer to this depends person to person, right? Um, but Plato really had a snide view of people who really paid attention to bodily pleasures over anything else. He thought that puts you on the level of animals. You're no better than a dog if that's what you do. And you see as well, again, I've talked about Plato and Christianity. You see as well, whenever people like St. Paul talks about sin and the pleasures of the flesh versus versus the soul, you see the influence here. Right, comes from he developed a lot of this from Platonic thought. So hopefully, at the end of the lecture today, you now sort of see the importance of this guy. Right, he developed everything. All of Western thought owes a debt to Plato. You could spend a whole class doing nothing but talking about Plato. He wrote tons of different books, The Republic being one, Phaedo, Theaetetus, wrote all kinds of different good books. But he's the OG that we owe everything to. Okay. So, but notice how I'm only spending one day on him, mostly because his ethics aren't that complicated. If we were talking about metaphysics and stuff like that, I would probably spend more time talking about them. The kind of the transition you to get us to think about next class. Plato, let me see if I can find the picture real quick. Plato pointing up, Aristotle pointing down. Here's this is a famous artwork to kind of transition us to the next class. Here we go. And this is a famous painting that was done in the Renaissance. This is Plato. He's pointing up. Aristotle is kind of pointing down. It's a sweeping generalization of both thinkers. But it's this idea that Plato's philosophy is way up in the clouds, right? Talking about the forms. Aristotle's philosophy is more grounded on earth in our human experience. So Plato's more metaphysical. Aristotle's more grounded more in sensory experience. So that's kind of a nice transition way into thinking about them. Both these men are the cornerstones of everything we know today. And you guys will start Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics next time, chapter 1 and 2. Okay. Again, word of the wise, give yourself plenty of time to read. I would suggest reading it once, going back and looking at it again a day or two later. That's my best advice until you get used to it, at least. I know time is currency, but when it comes to reading stuff like this, that's the best strategy. Okay. We'll have a good time next time talking about Aristotle. I need to finish Plato too, but that's enough for today. I think you guys after today, if you paid attention today, you did all your readings, I think you can go ahead and probably take that quiz on Socrates, because I think I pretty much covered everything. Okay. And I'll put up a quiz after class today on the Plato stuff too, just to make sure you learned everything. Okay. So it's great to see you all again. And 3 weeks later, here we are. So hopefully this won't happen again. So,
Will this lecture be updated today?
yeah, it's recording, so I'll post it later.
Okay. I just want to rewatch it.
All right, guys, take it easy. See you next time.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Dude.